this thing on? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the last speech for this year's Institute on National Affairs. As most of you probably already know, our symposium has been entitled Art in America Today, A Public Matter. And I hope all of you have had a chance or an opportunity to get to see the things that have gone on this last week on campus. There are a few things that are still going on that I think are really well worth mentioning. And these are two different exhibits. One is the Papa John collection, which is over in the Brunier Gallery at the Sheeman Continuing Education building, and it will be open until February 22nd. And the other one is the Eskimo art exhibit, and that's here at the Memorial Union, and it will be still up until the end of January. So if you get a chance, I think it'd be well worthwhile to stop by and take a look at it. And for our topic tonight, it's entitled Art and Politics, and our speaker is Charles Christopher Marks. He was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He has a BA in English and a master's in social work. He's been related with the arts for quite a while, and some of his past positions have been director of the Arts Council in Winston-Salem, South Carolina. He was founding executive director for the Greater St. Louis Arts Education Council, consultant for the National Foundation of the Arts, special consultant for the arts at the White House, president of the Performing Arts Council of the Music Center of Los Angeles County, and he also has written a book entitled Runaway Home. He is presently publisher and editor of the Art Reporting Service, and he's also an art commentator for the National Public Radio. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've introduced to you Charles Christopher Marks.
And my latest activity is Arctic exploring in Iowa. It sounds like I can't hold a job, all those things that I've done. And it's true. Art and politics is a fairly new term, as is cultural policy, arts administrators. All these things didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. In fact, I am half of the extant original Arts Council executives. When I became an Arts Council executive down in Winston-Salem in 1958, there were 4 people in the country who were employed professionally to administer a federated arts program. Of the 4, one of them drank himself to death, which is about the right statistical mortality for the field. About 25% meet that fate. Another one, his wife he had 6 daughters, and he was offered a vice presidency, and they were very good Catholics, and he was offered a vice presidency of a Catholic girls' college, which included free tuition. So he left the field. So another man and I are the only ones who survived, and I think he stayed because nobody else would hire him to do anything. Of course, I had a choice of anything I wanted to do, but I chose this field. I was going to fare forward to the end. The way I got involved in politics and the arts was I got fired in St. Louis at the Arts Council and was looking around for something to do. And a mutual friend asked me if I wanted to come to Washington and work for the Office of Education, U.S. Office of Education. I said, come on, who wants to do that? That's the dullest thing in the world. But she was in Washington, and Roger Stevens had been appointed as special assistant to President Johnson. And they had lunch together one time, and I'd met Roger Stevens. He was then chairman of what was known as the National Cultural Center, which then became the Kennedy Center. after Kennedy's tragic death. And now Johnson had appointed him to investigate the possibility of a federal arts program. So he and Kathy had lunch, and she suggested that he needed somebody who knew what was going on in the grassroots movement in the country, and my name came. Yes? All right, we have three up here. None of them are for speaking. This one should be, the one in the middle. Right there. Yeah. That one's, no, that was... The only one working? Why are we recording this, I might ask, before I go on? What are you going to do with this? Who's on the end of this one? I mean, if this is for private use in your own home, and you have permission of the National Football League, it's all right. But we're going to broadcast this, that tempers what I'm going to say a little bit. I smoke while I talk because I used to live in North Carolina, where you were chastised if you didn't smoke while you talked. The Reynolds Tobacco executives would take your name. Are they working on something? At any rate, I wound up in Washington, working in the White House. And I figured that's the place to start if you're going to start a new career. And I didn't know anything, and neither did Roger Stevens. And we had to learn from there. The first assignment I had was to go around the country and see if anybody was interested in the federal arts program. And there was only one burning question at the time. Will we have government control of the arts if we have a government program? And I said, well, I don't really know. And my standard answer was, I don't really know. I've only been in Washington 6 months. But so far as I can determine, the government doesn't control the government. How are they going to control the arts? I mean, the whole thing is a monolith. It moves forward like a giant California slug after a heavy rain, leaving sticky residue behind it as it, it has no eyes or no, it just moves. Like Doxiadis' concept of a city, when one city becomes a slum, you just move, just pick a place where you can move it along in an east-west direction, just keep building new city. That's the way the government operates. It doesn't make any difference who's president in the Congress. It just moves, like a university. It exists, it goes. And then I would answer the question with, they'd say, government will control the arts. I said, give me an example of a very good Republican opera. Or how about a real Zacco Democratic symphony? And they really hadn't, they were fearful of something that couldn't possibly happen, because the only you have to have an ideology in order to have a government control. I mean, Marxism is easy, because Marx says all art must be understandable by the least peasant. So when a composer writes a piece of music, they get orchestra to play it, they get a bunch of peasants around to listen to it. You like it, you don't like it. You don't like it, forget it, write another one. Can't do this in this country, because there is no Republican art, there's no democratic art. The only principle we have, and the only ideology, is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So how are you going to, so we control that. You must write a free play, a free book, a free piece of music. It's ridiculous. But still, they were very fearful. Symphony orchestras voted 87%, something like that, trustees, managers, against government support of the arts, lobbied against it. People came to Washington, lobbied against it. Big organizations in the arts. But when they saw that the bill was going to pass, this wonderful country has such high ideals, and top of the list is something called pragmatism. When they failed and it was going to pass, they said, we never said we were against government support for the arts. We decided, we really looked into it now, and we know it's going to be all right, because they wanted a piece of the pie. And so we got it. And we got it, then I found out there's very strange things going on in Washington about how things get done. For instance, the first bill we got through was to create a national council. See, President Kennedy was a very impatient man, and he didn't have the patience to work with the Congress. So there was a bill proposed that there be a national council on the arts. And when it came onto the floor of the House, a congressman introduced an amendment that the arts shall include the art of poker playing. And they debated that for a long time. not whether or not it was an art form, but whether or not they were including all forms of poker that the members of the House could understand. And so they defeated it. And President Kennedy got upset about that, and he said, to hell with them, I'll create one by executive order. I'll just sign my name and we'll create an advisory council by executive order. And this was just at the point where he was killed. And so when President Johnson came in, he eventually got around to these unexecuted executive orders, and whether it's apocryphal or factual, I don't know, but it's been quoted to me that he looked at this, read the bill, and he said, no, this is the kind of thing that if the people don't do it, it isn't worth a damn. He says, get me somebody who can get this through if that's what we want. And Roger Stevens came on the scene, and of course he got it done. This was an advisory council only. And the way that Roger Stevens got it done was he had a secretary who had a boyfriend, and they went on a date, and she came in one morning and she said, you know, that bill that we're trying to get out of Judge Smith's committee, who was then chairman of the Rules Committee, I think he died, hope. At least he's not chairman anymore. My boyfriend says that Judge Smith is a very good friend of a certain banker in Washington, and that if he'll do whatever this banker tells him to. So Roger Stevens went over to this bank where he was doing some real estate dealings from time to time, and chatted to this banker about a loan for a certain project that he was trying to get through in Washington, which was sheer, he didn't intend to do this, but, you know, it gave him an entree. And then he said, by the way, I've got this little bill in Congress that the president is anxious about, and it's held up in Judge Smith's Rules Committee, and it's really harmless. It's only $50,000 a year, but it would do a lot of good for the arts and blah, blah, blah. And the banker says, oh, I'll talk to Howard. And he picked up the phone and talked to Howard. The next day, the bill came out of committee. So you see how the wonderful civic progress of manifestations of democracy go inexorably forward based on such a... now do I hold that? I feel like Andy Williams here.
Hold it. It's up to you.
I'm not going to interfere with them. Well, you won't tell me what you're going to take it for anyway. How's that? There we go. I think I should shave. Is this better? Oh, boy. So it's that kind of thing that often gets things done in Washington because your secretary's boyfriend knows somebody who knows somebody. So we got that bill through. And then we got the snowball rolling, and we got the endowment bill through. Now, the endowment, we had a lot of trouble with the humanities people, for instance. The humanities people came to Washington to testify for the Arts and Humanities Bill, and their strategy was to throw out what had been proposed and go in there and make a big case for having a humanities endowment which included the arts under it. And within 12 hours, it's amazing how all these academicians changed their mind, all these scholars changed their mind, because a certain congressman sat down with them and said, if you go in there and give that testimony, there isn't going to be a humanities bill, there isn't going to be an arts bill. And so they had to rewrite their testimony. Just, big, you do it, raw power. Another thing about the inside of how things get done in Washington, Larry O'Brien at that time was LBJ's legislative man, and his Congress watcher. I remember Saturday morning we were all sitting around there, Senator Pell and Livingston Biddle, who was now the chairman of the National Endowment, was an assistant to Pell at that time, and Congressman Thompson and his aide, and Roger Stevens and I, and we were talking about whether we should push in this session and what we should push for and exactly what kind of legislation the Congress would hold still for. And Larry O'Brien sat there and listened, and then he reached into his pocket like this. And here's a piece of paper that he carried with him at all times, and it had the members of the House and the members of the Senate. And he said, well, let me see now. He said, arts bill only. Let me see. Yes. No. Yeah, well, his wife paints. He was an English major. Not a very good congressman, but he was an English major. And he went right down the aisle, and right down the list, and made an assumption about everybody in the Congress. Senate and the House last. Arts bill, this is humanities bill only. No. Arts and humanities, they've done a list of Guinness. And that's why we have an arts and humanities department. At a UNESCO meeting sometime later, I told a Frenchman that story about how it was done. And mon Dieu! So offended the Gallic sense of logic, you know. This is, we planned for 5 years before we put forth the bill to create the Maison de Culture, you know. I said, well, no, just a half an hour, and Larry O'Brien's office could have saved our time with it. We planned things, you know, right from the top. So we got the arts bill through in the form that we got it through. The reason there was a state arts council provision in the bill was not because there had been any long-term planning to create a state arts council, and it was a social movement and a deeply thought-out concept of cultural progress. I was in there because that was the price of Senator Javits' support. He represented one of the few states that had a state arts council at the time. And Senator Javits is a liberal Republican, and we knew we could never get it through without the support of the liberal Republicans, and we never would have. Without Javits in the Senate, and I forget Frelinghuysen in the House, leading the Republicans, the liberal Republicans, to vote with the Democrats, because we lost the conservative Democrats, and you can't get the conservative Republicans. So, something like this. They were out to lunch. But that's how we squeaked the thing through. And the leader of the opposition in the House was a man named Gerald Ford. He was right in there, fighting against us, right until the time that Nixon became president, and Nixon said, don't do that no more, Gerald. And he said, okay, I won't do it no more. He went right down the party line. The only time we stopped him in his tracks was the time we got an editorial on how good the arts were from the Detroit Free Press just the day before our bill came to the House floor. And it actually came to the editorial actually was shoved in front of him while he was just getting up from his seat. And he looked down. So I learned about politics fast and in a hurry. So we got the bill passed, right? And Roger Stevens and I looked at each other and said, now what do we do? I mean, we didn't know. We had absolutely no idea. How do you create a federal agency? There is no mechanism. Federal government has been in business for 200 years. It's created hundreds of federal agencies, and there's no agency on agencies, or even anything that's supposed to be. There's something in the Bureau of the Budget, but everybody told me, don't go near them because they'll screw it up for you. Set it up the way you want, then go to them for approval. I said, how do you set up a federal agency? Roger Stevens said, well, I got a real estate deal in New York, and so I got a couple of places I want to look at. And he says, get the thing started. I'll be back in a few days. And there I sat, and just as you're sitting here today, I knew as much as you do right now about it. And I got to buttonholing people on the bus in the morning. That's it. You work for the government? What do you work for? Say, Science and Technology Council. Oh, good, council. That's like us. We got a council. Who's your boss? And that's where I was doing it. And one thing led to another, of course. I got better at it. But the thing I had going, the thing that you have, the most beautiful weapon you can have, tool in this whole country, is to work in the White House. Because I had the stationery and I had the phones. And you can talk to anybody in the world and they will talk to you. If they pick up that phone and say hello, and somebody says, the White House is calling, will you hold, please? They'll sit there for the rest of their lives. Because they don't know who the hell's going to come out of it. They all have this secret belief that it's the president. Or somebody, and particularly if somebody's working for the government, way down the line someplace. And, the White House is calling. He has never seen the White House. He came there to work for agriculture. They took him out to the northwest part of Washington. He's been there ever since. And boy, the White House on the line. It's somebody. So I could get to see anybody and pick their brains, and it was ruthless. I'd say, well, now, I thought you could help me with some of the legal problems of getting an agency started. Oh, yes. well, we could use some help. You don't happen to have a lawyer that you could assign to us to take care of it? Oh, yes. Let's take my assistant. No, he's my cousin. Because all this accrued bounty points to them and to their agency, and they're very eager to do this. So by that method, I managed to get things started, and picking the brains of people who knew. I went to the Office of Education, and I stole an administrative officer, got him on assigned leave. They were paying his salary. Because we didn't know, first of all, we didn't know how to get the money. The Congress said they shall have so much money. I said, well, how do we get this? Well, you have to ask for an appropriation. I said, how do you ask for an appropriation? That's not our department. We're the Bureau of the Budget. Once the budget leaves us, that goes up to the Hill. That's a different, separation of powers. That's the legislative branch. You have to ask them. I said, but aren't they my enemies, my adversaries? They said, yes, they are. So are they going to tell me how to do this? They said, well, I don't know. That's not our department. Nobody in the government ever says yes. Because you don't get promoted for saying yes. You get promoted for saying no. Because that's how you keep things the way they always are. Can I do this? Let me say, no. It's not on the list, no. I learned this. A phrase that you always have to use is, what is the language and procedure? Because they always want to tell you the way they do it, but that has nothing to do with the language and the procedure, the way the law is written and the way the federal regulations are. So much of it is custom and myth, and it's always super cautious. If you can get to the language and the procedure, you can find out what kind of latitude you have, and it's always broader than what they'll tell you. So I went to borrow people from all over, and I got them. But then there's a strange procedure in the government. You see, you have to have civil service permission to hire people, right? Because the whole government is, the spoil system is all went out with Garfield, remember? And now we have civil service, which says you have to get approval from the Civil Service Commission to create a position. Fine, okay, go to the Civil Service. Here are the forms to create a position. I read the forms. Now I want to, let me see, it says name of position. Legal counsel. Job description. I have to take care of legal things. I fill out all the form, and I get to the bottom of the form. And it says, this form must be signed by, there's a blank. On one side it says, the legal counsel. On the other side it says, the administrative officer. And then down below it says, chairman of the agency. Charles C. Mark, legal counsel. Gave it to Roger Stevens, he signed it as chairman. And I wrote on the other side, Charles C. Mark, administrative officer. Sent it to the Civil Service, they gave us a legal counsel. All together. And this goes for stationery, everything you have to, somebody has to sign it. And my rank at the time was consultant to the arts, which has nothing in the government. That's a bad word to be, because that means you have no responsibility. You are a consultant. You have no authority whatsoever. Altogether, I signed 523 illegal documents by this method, which the General Services Administration, the GAO, the General Accounting Office, which belongs to the Congress and investigates whatever you tell them to investigate if you're a congressman. They'll investigate your grandmother's varicose veins if a congressman says you have to do that. So they march into their office after about 6 months of operation, and they said, Mr. Mark, you signed 523 illegal documents. I said, yes, what else is new? They said, that's terrible. That's a federal crime. And I said, I don't doubt it. And they said, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? I said, no, I'm going to do about it. I'm going to forget about it. What are you going to do about it? And they said, we're going to charge you with signing 523 illegal documents. I said, well, would you come back later? I'm busy. I'm very busy. And they said, you'll have to give testimony. I said, I'll be happy to give testimony. And they said, and they called me and they said, can you come over? I said, no, I can't come over. You come over here. Because by this time I had rank. See? I had power. I'd been appointed by the president to a super grade. Now they weren't going to fool with me. Good thing I wasn't a consultant. They would have put me in irons. So I made them come over there, and they came over with a court reporter. And these two guys sat there with this big, and literally the stack was this high. And they intended to go through every single one of those documents that I had signed and ask me questions about them, why I signed them, when I signed them, was I aware that I signed them illegally, et cetera, et cetera. And so I began giving them the same answer for every question. Yes, I signed them. I don't remember when I signed it. Why did I sign it? I signed it because, a matter of expedience, to get the agency started, there was nobody else to do it. And they said, do you intend to give the same answer for all this? these questions on all these documents? I said, you tend to ask the same questions? I am going to give the same answers. I've been here all day. And they said, well, can we assume you will give these answers? I said, I swear to God I'm going to give those answers. Just get the hell out of here. I don't want... But this is all procedure, you know. This is all very, very serious to them. And then they went away, and they were going to make a determination as what to be done about me, what could be done about me. They came back after about a month, and they said, we have decided that all those documents must be redrawn and signed by the proper person. I said, you understand that at the time, and you want to date them at the original date? Yes. As you understand, if you do that, you're having people sign them who weren't even existing at the time the documents were drawn. Like the legal counsel didn't get hired until 2 months after I signed the legal counsel. They said, we're aware of that. So that's what they did. We had to type up all those documents and have the right people sign them. And then I got back to work. And that's the kind of thing that you go through on the bureaucratic side in Washington. On the legislative side, became aware going into Congress for the first time to testify before a committee, something that was very important to learn, that the committees are your adversary until they mark up a bill, what they call mark up a bill, and then they become your advocates. And if you can keep that in mind, you can keep your temper about you, because these are experts. You know, they were all lawyers in the first place. I think prosecuting attorneys who specialize in prosecuting pimps or something. They're so mean as cross-examiners that you have to realize that when that bill goes on the floor, they are the ones that are going to have to protect you and defend you, because they say this is what this agency is entitled to. By God, they're going to get it. And they then, among their colleagues, have to defend you. So that's why they ask you all these hard questions. But they're so good at it. They lead you down the garden path. You know, how about this? How about this? How about this? Then how do you account for this? It was a mistake. I didn't get much sleep the night before. But you have to defend yourself, and they're really very fair with you, and they're very fair with us, except one Republican from Virginia. He used to ask us for all kinds of favors. He'd ask us for Broadway tickets and opera tickets, and could we do this and could we do that? And we'd give it to him, and we'd say, we're going to vote for us. He'd say, no! When he saw us up in the gallery of the house, he'd wave us a big smile. It's wonderful. You guys are such wonderful things. And we'd say, how do you vote? No! But the rest of them were fairly nice people. And I really came to believe, after all this experience, first of all, I came to believe I didn't want to be a congressman. I had, like everybody comes to Washington, maybe someday I could. I was disabused of that dream, and I saw how hard they have to work and how much they are at the mercy of their constituents and the political pressures. It's just a miserable job. And if you think congressmen, have a soft life, they do not. Senators, yes. Supreme Court justices, of course. But congressmen, no way. As a matter of fact, Mondale's brother, Vice President Mondale's brother, is a longtime friend of mine and their families. And so we would be over at Pete and Ginny Mondale's frequently when Fritz's children would be over there playing. And their good friends were Congressman Quee's children, who was a congressman from Minnesota. And I remember one year was an election year, and the children of Fritz Mondale weren't even sure who he was running against. And the children of Congressman Quee knew everything about the whole election and the procedure and how tough it was going to be and how their father was doing in the polls. And then I asked one of them, I said, will you be glad when the election's over? And they said, yeah, we'll be so glad because we have 6 months before we have to campaign again. It is a way of life to the congressman and his whole family to be a congressman. But that was one thing I got disabused of, was political ambitions. And the other thing, I really came to respect and understand that the congressmen do and the senators do exactly as you tell them. And there's no question about this. And I don't mean you just write a postcard and say, I like Ike. But they respond to any kind of opinion that you have on any issue that's before them. And then they all say that, and it all sounds like a cliche that doesn't really have any weight, but they certainly do. They read that mail, they listen to those polls, they react according, and you get exactly the kind of government that you deserve. If you don't open your mouth on gun control, and the pro-gun people do, that's the way it's going to go. And I really came to respect that aspect of this great government, and it does respond. And that's what it's all about. And you cannot force these men to take a position on something that the people back home don't want. They like being congressmen, and they like to continue being congressmen, and that means they've got to get the votes, and they've got to read pretty accurately what you people want, and they want to hear. And I don't know what else there is to say about art and politics, except you want more art support, you've got to get in there and fight for it, at the state level and at the national level. Story about how Iowa got an arts council. I mean, then, right after the bill passed and the agency was set up and we hired a few people illegally, my next assignment was to take care of that state arts council business. I'm going to New York. I used my community organization techniques from health and welfare, and I dealt with governors and speakers in the House by conning them one way or the other. You know, I'd say to South Carolina, I'd say, you know, Georgia and North Carolina are going to have arts council. You're going to look like a fool, a foolish state, backward state, not in the middle, and that would help, you know, get the arts council. Then I'd go to North Carolina. I say, you know, South Carolina's going to have it. South Carolina's going to have it. North Carolina's going to have it. You know, this kind of thing. And I had pretty much all the states lined up. Nobody believed that the state legislators would ever vote our state arts council. That was, you know, they couldn't get it through the Congress. How are they going to get it through North Dakota? You know, everybody in Washington was saying. Everybody in the East was saying. But I was persistent, and I flew about 300,000 miles in 15 months. Just constantly lived on airplanes. I would be swimming in Hawaii at noon and drying my swimming suit over a hot wood stove in Fairbanks, Alaska at midnight. And I never would find out what time it is, because you keep losing time all the time. This jet lag wasn't known as well as it is now, and I can testify that it really exists. I never did. I swear I lost 12 hours someplace and I never caught up. There's 12 hours missing out of my life, and I'm going to find it. I have to fly around the world twice to catch up. But Iowa was sticky. I don't know who's governor, I forget, maybe Hughes. I couldn't crack him, and I couldn't crack the Speaker of the House, and I couldn't get any place, and I'd been back once or twice. I was going to come back one more time and just tell them that every state has got it now except you. And I forget what other state, I know Wyoming, Arizona, or someplace, you know, some backward state, not good Midwestern state. You've had my respect all my life. I'm from Wisconsin. Why don't you get with it, you know? That was the only appeal I had. I happened to meet a fellow in the airport who was picking up somebody, and he was working in the state at the time. And I knew him from Wisconsin, and he had just done a survey that showed that the graduates of the universities in Iowa tended to leave Iowa after graduation. Something like 4 years after that, there were only 20% of them left in the state or something like that. And I thought that was a very salient argument. So I went to the governor, and I was making my point, and I said, I understand that Iowans are leaving wholesale after they get the university education. He says, how'd you find it out? And I really couldn't tell him that I met a guy at an airport that I used to do plays with in Wisconsin. And I said, well, I understand there was a survey done, and that was the results of it. I said, yes, and we're not making it public, and for very good reason, because it's costing $50,000 to educate one of these kids at State University, and then they're leaving, and we're just ignoring the whole thing. I said, well, maybe one of the reasons they're learning is you're taking them out of these small towns, bringing them to Ames, Iowa City, having these wonderful concert programs, teaching them art appreciation, music appreciation, theater appreciation, dance appreciation, appreciation. And then you're educating them in this way for 4 years, getting them used to the finer things in life. Appetite grows with the eating. And then you're saying to them, now you go right back down there to Boone, Iowa, and you run your father's business or your father's farm, and you just forget about all you learned. I said, you think maybe that's one of the reasons why they're fleeing to such cultural capitals as Milwaukee? And so he said, I will have an arts council in this state if it can be attached to the university, because that makes good sense to me. And I said, you know, either close the universities or have an arts council. I thought that was a good choice. Or stop teaching art, stop teaching theater, stop teaching these things, because you're only making unhappy Iowans. And what this country doesn't need is any more unhappy Iowans. They're unhappy enough without this education. And on the basis of that, the governor, backed it, and the first arts guy, is it still attached to the university? Is it still official? No, outside the university? But that was the only one and he said, would you recognize such a thing? I said, I recognize everything, because I had to go to the Congress and say, I've got an arts council in every state, and I'll give me the money, which was only $2.5 million, something like that at the time. But I was bound and determined that the first year that the state arts councils could have money, I was going to come in there and have, if not all of them, damn near all of them, organized. And we did. All got started. But such things I used to do to lie to the Congress in the United States. Yes, North Dakota, yes, they have an arts council. Sort of. It did pass the legislature, but the governor vetoed it. What did we say? I said, pretty cold in here. And again, it was a matter of the right people in the right place. And the kind of pressure that you could build up at the grassroots level came right from the bottom. That did it in every case. First year, we got $2.5 million for the whole National Endowment for the Arts. This year, President Carter proposed $150 million. And that's not adequate, because the need is so great. And as the Arts Endowment is more aware of all of the arts activity that's going on in this country, we start out with a staff of 15 or 20. And now the staff is 150. And the people discovered the Arts Endowment gradually and slowly. We didn't encourage them. We tried to keep it a secret as much as possible. It's amazing how people find out about these things and what they want, People would show up in the office saying, well, I've been a music instructor here in Boise, Idaho for a long time now, and I've always wanted to have my own orchestra, and now that my government, which I love so greatly, the government, I love it, is having a lot of money for arts, I thought you'd give me that orchestra because it would do a lot of good in Boise. And I brought a suitcase along that's empty to take the money back. I mean, practically that kind of proposal. Certainly we got them in the mail, if not in person. But I think what has happened, I made the statement, I've done it. No. I don't think that we did anything that was remarkable. That's what I'm saying. I don't think President Johnson did anything except perceptively read, as politicians somehow managed to do, as artists somehow managed to do. But politicians do it with the general population, and artists do it with the truth that they are involved in. He read that the country was ready for it, and I think the congressmen and senators read it in the same way. And I think they were just acting out the will of the people at the time when they passed this arts legislation. And the same way with the states. Because something happened to this country after World War II that caused it to suddenly turn to the arts in greater and greater, ever-accelerating degrees. I think the experience of the war, the bloodbath that we all experienced, we went off, and we had our friends killed, and we saw cities destroyed, innocent people killed. We wanted to do something creative and constructive rather than destructive. I think that's a kind of natural reaction in general after wars. I think that education, the GI Bill, I certainly would never have gone to college without the GI Bill. My family wasn't happy that I went to high school. I did it, under there, and I certainly would have never been exposed to the arts, day that I got off the bus in Madison, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when I realized these were 26,000 students. People, not students, they were people that had nothing to do but learn. It was just a whole new world. I never went back to Milwaukee after that. And I think there were millions like me who had this experience as young men. And then we saw cultures, though we were blowing up their cities. At the same time, we saw what people valued and kept and preserved over centuries and centuries. I think that had an impact on us. And we had the population basket upset when everybody moved from New York to Iowa and from Iowa to California and from California to Arizona, thinking they were getting greener grass, and the great influx of immigrants from Europe. And it was the first time in the history of this country that we got the best instead of the worst. Instead of getting the immigrants that couldn't make it as peasants in Europe, as our forefathers, mine included, suddenly these were the intellectuals and the educated people who were being thrown out of the European countries. And they moved all over the country. I remember Winston-Salem had never had a foreign film until 1955. They'd never seen a foreign film until 1955 when a man named, what was his name? Frank Korpi, who was a German chemist who had been thrown out of 14 countries before he got to this one. I mean, he fled the Nazis because he was Jewish, and he went to Switzerland, and he got into Italy, and he got through Italy, and smuggled through Italy, into Portugal, Spain, South America, Cuba. Finally, he bought a false passport in Cuba and got in the United States. He says, those Cubans, they're so dumb. $50 for a false passport. Be an American citizen for $50. It's better than being an American citizen if you can just buy it like that. So, and the way he learned all these languages, in these countries where he had to hide in, was by going to movies. So he saw every movie ever made. And he organized a Film Friends Society. Film Friends, he called it. Film Friends Society in Winston-Salem, which just set the whole town on fire. They'd never seen these things. Yeah. And this was happening all over the country. And as they say, the appetite grows with the eating. And it just started to move. And then they weren't satisfied with warmed over Broadway and started the theaters that started doing their own plays. And that's very recent. I mean, mid-'60s, I was going all over in the country. I'd come to a town and they'd say, "Oh, it's so good to have you here. We'd like you to see our new professional theater. So if you don't mind, we'll go straight there. You can eat afterwards." And they're doing the Caucasian Chalk Circle. And I'd say, "Oh, wonderful. I haven't seen the Caucasian Chalk Circle since last week." They were all doing what Alan Schneider used to say, the 26 varieties of Bertolt Brecht and others all over the country. I mean, that was the wave. If I saw Waiting for Godot one more time, I was going to scream, or Oh Dad, Poor Dad. They were all doing these kinds of plays and doing well at it because they were bringing that kind of theater to cities that had never seen it. But then in the last 10 years, we've had suddenly somebody started doing new plays, and now we're seeing a lot of new plays in the theaters. And the same thing is happening in the museums and in all the fields. And I think we're going to go back to a regional kind of art that was a movement that started in the 20s and 30s and fell flat on its face because there wasn't the kind of artistic confidence on the part of the artists that was required. The only thing that ever came out of it was the outdoor dramas in North Carolina and a Pulitzer Prize to, what's his name, Green for, Paul Green for, what was a play? When he won the Pulitzer Prize, Green in My Pad or something. Well, anyway, that's about all that happened out of the Drummond, Green, Robert Gard movement in regional arts at that time. But I think we're coming back to this now, where artists are learning to say, no, I don't want to go to New York. I want to stay here. I want to work here. And they're moving out of New York to the regions and are happier for it, and more productive and more creative. And there's no longer the barrier. If you're good all over. There's no longer a stigma to being good in Kankakee and not good in New York, whether it's creative or performing artist. And that's all happened just since 1945, 1948, that the arts had changed.